Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the TF podcast, where we discuss technology, finance, and business. My guest today is Danielle Strachman. She is the founding partner at 1517 Ventures. She has a pretty interesting story of just how she got there, and I'm just really excited to have this conversation with you today. So with that, Danielle, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jonathan. Excited to be on your podcast. Yeah, a quick intro is that I have no business being in the business I am. If someone had asked me 10 years ago, would you be in VC? I would have said, what's VC? I used to be an educator and a school principal and
Oh,
a
wow.
school founder. Then I joined the Teal Fellowship team early, 10 years ago. I came on like maybe something like day 10 of that program. Led us to seeing some really extraordinary results, which led myself and my colleague from the Teal Foundation, Michael Gibson, to really sort of jump ship and start Fellowship 2.0 with 1517 Fund.
Excellent. I'm excited to dive into all of that. So can you just level set for those that might not be familiar with the Teal Foundation? It was an interesting, or I know it's still going, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I would say, there's a lot of prominent entrepreneurs that have come through that as well. I'd love to kind of hear, how did you even get involved with that to begin with? You said you're an educator, so I'm assuming that had something to do with it.
Yep. Yeah. So this is back in 2010. So I'm looking forward to doing some sort of like Teal Fellow reunion of sorts soon. We used to always say about the program that it's a 2-year program with a 10-year time horizon. And so we're hitting on the 10 years now, and it's been really amazing to see what's happened. But to go back in history a little bit to inform people, the Teal Fellowship is a program that was started by Peter Teal back in 2010. For anyone listening who doesn't know, Peter is the first investor in Facebook, is also the, one of the co-founders of PayPal as well. A lot of people know his work through Founders Fund and so on. So just very active in investing.
Sure.
And 10 years ago, he had this kind of harebrained idea that, hey, maybe it makes sense to give some young people who have something that they want to build $100,000 as a grant to work on something full-time outside of school and outside of other employment. And that is what became the Teal Fellowship. It used to be called 20 Under 20, because at the time we were taking 20 people a year under the age of 20 to work on a science or tech project of their choosing. And we didn't know exactly what the program looked like. We were really building the airplane as we were trying to fly it at the same time. And I still remember interviewing actually with the president of the foundation, Jonathan Kane, at the time. And it was just all really new, especially as a charter school founder. I was very used to operational roles and, hey, you have to work with a district and you have to get all these approvals. And I knew some people at the Teal Foundation, and someone called me up and said, hey, they've started this new program. You'd be perfect for it with your background in education and understanding how to run a program, understanding young people.
Totally.
I have a background in homeschooling as well. And so it was really conceived as like an older young person's homeschool program, very independently minded and thinking about the needs of each individual person instead of them as a cohort.
Yeah.
But yeah, we learned a lot along the way. We read over our first cohort had 400 applicants, and now there are thousands of applicants who apply each year. When we left, there was something like 2,000, maybe 3,000 people who were applying per year. And I know the numbers are higher. I don't know what they are now. But this whole notion of, hey, maybe you don't have to school has really changed. In 2010, this was heresy. I mean, we were called the most misguided piece of philanthropy out there, by people who were administrators at places like Harvard and so on. And what's interesting is that with 1517, actually just a few weeks ago, we launched something we call the Invisible College. And we saw this huge influx of young people reaching out to us for investment. But typically people have some sort of pilot, they're going into with a customer or two, they have some semblance of a product, it's super scrappy, but they could kind of have something. And with COVID happening and people being asked to spend, tens of thousands on Zoom school, we thought, this is ridiculous. We've got to do something about it. And opportunistically, over the last 5 years with 1517, we've been writing 50K checks into R&D companies here and there to help young people get those off the ground. But we said, hey, you know what, maybe maybe now's the time to operationalize that a bit. So we launched Invisible College to do that. But the difference in when we launched the fellowship 10 years ago and when we launched Invisible College about a month and a half ago, completely different. People are like, this is amazing. Invisible College is incredible.
Just the
How
climate's different.
innovative. Right, exactly. I mean, even people who are pro college are writing and saying, this is so great. It's so needed. I'm pro college, but the world is just totally different now. No one should be paying $50,000 for Zoom school. But 10 years ago, it was, I mean, we were considered evil by certain people. And what we really wanted to do with the Teal Fellowship was to help make it normal for a family, you know, in any part of the US to have that conversation with their teenager of like, is college the right path for you? Like maybe there are other paths, like maybe it's a boot camp, maybe it's trade school, maybe it's apprenticing somewhere. And some of the people we got to work with were really incredible. We saw, you know, what's interesting about the fellowship is that we were really selecting people based on potential. We're not like Forbes 30 under 30 where we said, oh, look, you did this thing and now we're going to stamp you with our approval for doing something cool. It was more, hey, we think you have potential to take the next 2 years and $100,000 as a grant and, you know, work on something of your choosing with each other, with other people, with the support of the foundation, with the support of our mentor network. And we saw some really amazing, extraordinary things happening. So we had people like Vitalik Buterin, who had not even launched Ethereum until he was inside the fellowship. We had actually denied him the year before. He had applied the year before. We love frequent flyers. Like the people who like get knocked down and come back. I'm all about the underdog. So Vitalik had originally pitched us an ed tech idea, and for us at the time, this was probably around 2013. We were like, like, you know, like kind of like singing to the choir kind of thing. But then he started getting into crypto, and he was an editor for Bitcoin magazine, and we were like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And so my colleague Michael Gibson worked with him quite a bit on like the very start of Ethereum. We worked with Dylan Field from Figma. You know, he kind of touts us as the people who gave him enough money to have like bunk beds with his co-founder Evan to get things going.
I love Figma too, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's another amazing one where it's kind of like this, like mind blown, like holy crap. Like I go to hackathons all the time, and now I'm going to virtual hackathons. But right before COVID hit, I remember I was at an all women's hackathon, and they were using Figma as their tool to like bust out their designs during the weekend, and I was like, wow. Like that's so crazy. Or like I saw Dylan tweeted recently about it was like looking for skill sets on a job application. It was like you need 5 years of Figma, but the product they're talking about hasn't actually existed for 5 years. So Dylan like was circling it, being like, I don't know how this is possible.
Yeah, those are terrible. Those are worse.
It's kind of funny, but it's interesting to see that like, oh wow, this tool is being used. Or we have or people like Ritesh Agarwal with Oyo Rooms. He's from India. He applied when he was there as a Teal Fellow to do a Airbnb clone in India. And he had this sort of insight that Airbnb is not going to be able to do the same thing in other countries because they just don't understand the landscape. And what he was originally, I mean, this is true for founders all the time. What you originally start with isn't the thing you end with. But I still remember taking Skype calls with him, and he'd be in the background fluffing pillows at people's houses. And then to this day, I can email him any day of the week, and he gets back right away. Oh, Danielle, so good to hear from you. Yes, I'm happy to, help with this or do that, or do an interview with somebody about a thing. But it's cool, like to see. I think they have. I don't have the latest stats, but as of, I know, at least I think a year ago, I think they had like 10,000 employees. They're the second largest hotel chain in the world. Like that's crazy.
Really crazy.
And he was just this solo founder guy that we worked with. And then there's people like Austin Russell with Luminar Technologies. He came to us in the fellowship when he was 17, and he was working on physics projects, and we didn't know if he was crazy or crazy awesome. We were like, I just don't know. But he's the founder of Luminar. They are a autonomous driving tech startup. They have a public partnership now with Volvo, and they, have 400 people on their team. And it's just wild to see that. And then like lastly, people like Laura Deming, who she came to us in the first batch of fellows when she was she was, I think, 16 when she applied. And I think we brought her into the program when she was 17. And she was going to have this sort of, like, to us, this nice little like research fellowship where she was going to work on anti-aging research. But she came to us, and this happened with a lot of Teal fellows, where they'd kind of have this like Teal fellowship crisis, where they would have like this early 20s life crisis, where they'd say like, oh wow, I have this grant, I have the support of the Teal Foundation, I have kind of the ability to say it's okay for me to not be in school right now. Now I want to do something even bigger than what I applied with. And we did not expect that. We thought people were going to work on the things they applied with for the fellowship. But Laura came to us and she said, I think the gap in longevity research is actually funding. So I want to start a VC fund. And she's 17, like she's a minor. Like we're like, what? Like, you want to do what? We thought to ourselves, we're the crazy people who say some ideas can't wait and to support these things. And how dare us to be like, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't do that thing. And now she has 2 funds. Her first fund has done extraordinarily well. And she backs longevity companies. And it's just crazy to see that happen.
Well, what's so awesome to hear about all that is that, you often hear adults or people adulting and saying like, hey, you're too young for this. You have your whole life ahead of you. You should get a job and learn the ropes first and then do it. And so it's just the complete opposite of what a lot of people kind of have ingrained in their head or have been told either by their parents or society. Right. So
yeah, no, it's very true. And like one thing we do with 15, 17 is that we learned towards the end of the fellowship, we started experimenting with some new things. And on our team, we're all about the scrappy experiments. It's like 15, 17 started with 2 t-shirts that said 1517 on them. We went to a hackathon and pretended to be our venture fund we had no funding. We didn't have a website.
I love it. Oh, I love it.
But in that same vein with the fellowship, we started experimenting, giving out small grants to people of $1,000 just to see if it could help them to move along. And what we found with a lot of young people was it wasn't just that the money was helpful to them, because $1,000 only gets you so far, but it was hearing the support of people they respected and like real adults telling them, hey, yeah, we think this could have some legs and you should give this a go. Was just a very different mentality than anyone else who was talking to them saying, oh, you should wait until you're finished school, or wait until you have your first job, or wait until this or that. And it's not to say that you can't learn a lot, having a first job. And, people like Dylan, for example, are always touting like the early internships he had, as a way of knowing how to lead and seeing good examples. And I think that's really important, but it also doesn't always have to look that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you're at the fellowship, right? And, everything's going amazing. And I'm sure, I don't want to say it's comfortable, but like meaning like, how it operates, you know how it works or whatever, right?
No, it was on rails. We could have just been smooth sailing for a long time.
So like,
paycheck was great. It was much higher than it is now.
What was the crazy thing that hit your brain and said like, wait a second, like, yeah, I might be comfortable here, but like, there might be something else that might, be more interesting for me, right? What was that?
There were a few things. I mean, one was that actually I have to credit my colleague, Michael. He started thinking about these things earlier than I did. So 2 years in, he was kind of like, hey, we should probably set up some sort of angel investing group or something to make investments in fellows. And we kind of tried to pull that together, and it was kind of difficult to do. But part of what was difficult is I remember like Michael and I have shared an office, although I guess like minus COVID times, for 10 years. And so I like turned to him in my seat and I was like, what do we know about investing? Like, it was only 2 years into the program. How do we even know where these things are going to go? His intuition was dead on, because like people like Ritesh and Dylan were in that second class. If we had invested, that would have been amazing. Like we missed the boat on setting it up early. But in year 5, we kind of had this like, we called it a hypothetical portfolio of like, wow, like we have these fellows that we've worked with. We've seen what's happened after year 5. I think in year 5, fellows companies were worth something like $500 million, or nearing $500 million in market cap between, I think, 8 companies out of the 32 fellows that we had worked with. And, or 32 fellows who had raised money that we were working with, because some fellows were working on research and nonprofits. And one of the things that we saw was just how hard it was to find even people in the venture community who would take young founders seriously. So kind of to the point that you made earlier of that people are telling you stay in school, get a job. VCs would say, hey, come work at my company. They'd see talent and they'd spot it. And they'd say, hey, come work with my portfolio. They didn't say, we think you should start a company. So that was kind of the impetus, was seeing 5 years in where Figma was, where Oyo Rooms was, Luminar was just getting started. I think that was kind of a big one where we thought, gosh, like, we think Luminar has a chance to be a market leader in autonomous driving. We think it's crazy. But if we don't bust out now to do this, we're going to have Luminar be in our shadow portfolio of like, oh, well, we could have started the fund that year and we didn't, and then waited later. So we just saw a few things of that, like the investor community wasn't taking founders very seriously in this particular cohort, but we had a huge informational advantage of being able to work with these people over time. And as pre-seed investors, it's all about that relationship over time and seeing, like, does this person have the technical chops? Do they have the ability to sell? Are they able to work with other people? Are they able to build a team? And that's not something that you can get out of just a pitch meeting with somebody. I always tell people anybody can have 3 good meetings with you, but it's really about seeing, like, hey, how does this person traverse a very stressful situation? Or like, hey, I want to see the product after it's been revamped 3 times. Like, and you can do that as a pre-seed investor, but it takes getting to know people. So in 2015, my co-founder and I, we just kind of saw the writing on the wall of like, we could really, like, we like the phrase, go big or go home. And as much as we love the fellowship and we're still very active and, consider ourselves like, family members over there, we said, there's a way to go much bigger with this. We can support more people. In addition, we can keep working with people who are great. With the fellowship, if someone was a great fellow, I couldn't give them another fellowship. I couldn't be like, hey, Laura Deming, you get another fellowship from us. But with a VC fund, if someone's doing great work and they have an exit, or maybe even if they're not doing great work, but they're a great founder, like, well, maybe they're doing great work, but didn't work out. That's what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
But you can back them later and you can work with them again. And so I love that everything we are building sort of begets on the past of like, hey, our founders who are in year 5 of their companies are now helping our founders who are in year 1 of their companies, or the people that you saw working on something, maybe it was, ahead of its time, come back and say, hey, I've got the newest version of the thing that I used to work on, will you put another 200K into me? And, sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. But it has this longevity to it that we could never get with the fellowship.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Before I forget, what's 1517 about? Like the numbers.
So my colleague Michael is very big into history, and very learned. He's like half bro, half like scholar, and so he always loves talking about all kinds of different topics. And I remember when we were still at the fellowship, I walked into our shared office and he always uses just notebooks. Like, he's a notebook guy, and he has this page open and he's writing 1517 all over this notebook page. And I was like,
it kind of feels like a scary movie or something.
It did. I was like, what's wrong with you, man? Like, you look possessed writing 1517. Like, which is all, I hope he has a picture of this page somewhere. I should find out if he has it.
Yeah.
He also has a bad habit of leaving his notebooks in the pocket of airline seats.
Oh, no.
So hopefully he still has that one. But I remember asking him, like, okay, what's 1517? He's like, oh, I think it could be the name of what we want to start. And I was like, tell me more. This isn't ringing a bell for me. And he says, oh, the Protestant Reformation in the year 1517. And I was like, sorry, I must have missed that piece of history class. Like, help me out a little more. He's like, Martin Luther. I'm like, keep going. And he says, Martin Luther was nailing his theses to the church door, saying that it was heresy that, the common man had to buy a piece of paper to be able to get into the kingdom of heaven. And we think similarly that, today there's another large institution, higher ed, that says, hey, you have to buy a piece of paper, to be called an educated person. And the line we sometimes use when we're going to hackathons is that, like, it was bullshit then and it's bullshit now.
Yeah.
And actually that was after we thought of that name. That's when we printed off the 2 t-shirts, just 2 black t-shirts with 1517 Gaudi old style font, like nothing special. We
Yeah.
went to, Michael went to LA Hacks with 1,000 students. We had nothing. There was no website, nothing. He pitched the name, he pitched it was bullshit then, it's bullshit now. The crowd went insane. Like we had never seen anything like it. Cause I think with the fellowship, people loved the mission of the fellowship, but understood that it was kind of this like almost like a special forces of like only so many people are going to get this fellowship.
Sure.
It wasn't as relatable. But when we pitched 1517, we still have this saved, but this young woman tweeted at Michael, yo, I want to be part of the movement, bro. Send me a t-shirt. And we were like, what? Like we're a venture fund and people are calling this a movement. Like that's incredible. And I remember we got more exposure through 1517 in that one hackathon. And you know, Michael said like, hey, come see me at this table. I mean, we had no swag, nothing. It was just a bare table with Michael sitting at it and people running up and being like, oh, I want to learn more. Our first website actually used to just be a landing page that said 1517 and had our email and that was it. And people would lose their minds. They were like, what's the secret? Where's the
That's
Easter
funny.
egg? Like, sometimes we think we should go back to that website. Like, as people like secrets. People like the idea of things being kind of vague. So we've thought about that a lot of like, our community really likes puzzles and secrets and things like that. But that's how we got started. And we are a movement of sorts. We do a lot of community building. I always tell people from a capital perspective, the biggest thing that we do is write checks into portfolio companies. But from a people perspective, that's the smallest thing that we do.
Yeah.
You know, because in any given fund, we'll do about 35 to 40 companies over a 3-year period. So it's about one deal a month. But that means I'm talking to so many young people. And so we have a very vibrant Facebook group. We have a huge newsletter list. We're just mentoring and working with people and getting them to work with each other a lot because we just know it's about relationship over time. And that young person we meet when they're 18, you know, who kind of, I don't know, has some of the attributes that we look for in the people we work with, but they're not working on a company. We'll come back 2 years later and say like, hey, remember me? I'm the one who ran up to you about reading Cryptonomicon and I'm now working on my first company. And we're like, whoa, cool, great to hear from you again.
Yeah. Well, you know, what you're talking about there just shows the importance of branding, right? You know, as some people might hear like, oh, you have a t-shirt, oh, swag, that's silly or whatever. But it's like, no, like that little part is like the impetus of the brand, right? And
oh yeah, well, and it keeps our mission really in mind. It's funny, like people will come to us and they're like, hey, do I count I'm a PhD dropout? And we're like, sorry, no. Like,
yeah,
it's
totally.
a little different. It is really interesting. One thing we learned too is that we knew we wanted our fund to be a number because Michael had noticed, he had a sweatshirt that he wears all the time that has a particular mathematical number on it. And whenever he wore it, he noticed people would stop him and ask him, what is that? But when you wear a word, people don't ask you like, what is it? Because they think they know what it is.
Yeah, it's
and
funny.
You notice that numbers kind of have this hypnotic quality. Michael's particularly good at branding. He's also the one who came up with the Invisible College name for our 50K checks that we wrote. Like he's just
that's a great name too.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it has historical precedent as well. And so he's really good at taking things from history and like pulling them into the present, and it adds that relevancy and it has a bit more gravitas than just naming something randomly.
Totally. You know, I always say like, hey, if you're going to wear clothing, it might as well have nothing on it or your logo on it, right? So I actually designed this shirt. I don't know if you know what that means. I was
going to ask you about this. I was like, we got a star, a T, and an arrow. And I'm like, there's some.
Well, what direction is the arrow going?
It's up.
So say it again.
Star, T up. Oh, startup.
Yeah. So I get this, I wear this shirt and people will stop me like, wait, what is that? Like sound it out.
I love it. I've got my, I don't know if it can show up on the camera, but it says Kale on it. It says established 1517 on the bottom. So
nice.
we like to make fun.
Yeah, it's like yeah, why wouldn't you wear your stuff, right? It's so I'm actually really into hip hop. I'd like to take us a little bit off course, but more than like the music, I love understanding the backstory of artists. Yeah. And so every once in a while I'll like do these little segments where I'll do like a hip hop history or like business lessons in hip hop. And so Jay-Z is really interesting. You know, there's a lot to talk about, but when they started to get really, when Jay-Z started to get really famous, they started noticing that whenever he would wear Tommy Hilfiger or FUBU or basically anything else, or anything he would touch in a video would just sell out immediately. And so they were like, well, why don't we just create our own clothing line? And
Right.
that's where he created Rockaware.
Mhm.
And I think they did something like $80 million in sales within like the first 6 months, something crazy, like just some astronomical number.
That's
But it's
why.
like, what I find fascinating, I think you're doing, it sounds like you're doing a really great job of this, is that, you know, there's really a human element and then a people element and then a branding element to like why someone wants to, you know, find you and have you be their investor, right? Because
Yep.
there, you know, you probably heard that saying, like, let dinosaurs die, right? There's so many of like these historical funds
Yeah.
that are more just kind of counting on like this recognition. And so, you know, when you have a, you know, fund from the last 10 years, it's like, what makes you stand out? It's like, hey, like we have a brand, which
Yep.
means we have more reach, which means we have more people, which means
Yeah.
we have more access.
Well, and people love the mission. I mean, people have said like, "Oh, I'm so excited to work with you guys because not just because of how you work with founders, but because you stand for something that I believe in, which is the
Totally.
long path." And I mean, it's been really special because we just finished raising our second fund, and some of our founders from our first fund are now LPs in our second
That's
fund. And I'm
excellent.
like, wow, that's amazing! Like that, they are so like into essentially like what we do and like what they were able to receive from working with us, that now they're coming back in a support role, which is just really interesting.
Totally. No, I love that. I love that. So, you know, going on to like, I guess, present day, and I'd love to hear just how this has all been for you. So,
Yeah,
you know, COVID-19 hits. I'm assuming what you were doing in January and February is completely different from what you're doing
I
like
was flying
post
all over the country. I was going
March.
to events like crazy. I was shaking hands and hugging people.
Shaking hands and kissing babies.
I know. I was like, wow, I don't know if I'll ever kiss another baby again. Um, yeah, no, it's been wild, and I'm still kind of adjusting to it in some ways because I think none of us could have predicted uh, the longevity of what's going on. I don't even like saying things like the new normal. Like, I don't know, there's something about that that kind of feels alarming to me. Um,
Totally.
but yeah, when COVID first hit, we've been a remote team in some sense for a long time, and you know we were doing work from home days and doing tons of travel, and then it just was this huge increase and boost in that. We've done a lot of remote investing as well, so that was not particularly new for us. I think some of the bigger learnings were like what were going to happen for some of our companies. You know, for some of our companies, for companies that were kind of in between funding rounds and needing to raise a bridge and to figure things out. Some of those companies, I think, were able to get a little bit of a break on like, hey, you know what? It hasn't been working and that's okay. And like, there's no shame in rolling it back and saying like, hey, you know what? Like, it's time to be done.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk about with our founders a lot is that we would rather people swing for the fences and burn through cash and like learn a lot in a short period of time rather than be super conservative, hold on to their cash, and then have something that's not working over a long period of time, especially because
Sure.
we work with young people. I feel particularly invested in that. I want the people we work with to be getting onto the thing they're supposed to be working on as quickly as possible, because I think early career success is a huge confidence booster as a young person. And, you know, I had that through my 20s and can see how it's like success kind of begets success. And
Hmm.
so, what we don't want are people working on something that's not working, and people are kind of in the doldrums about what they're working on. And you're like, oh God, like get them out of this. So, like, some people were able to roll back in a little bit more of a seamless way. On the other side of things, we've had founders who have had to make really hard decisions in terms of scaling back their teams, in terms of doing layoffs. That was really difficult. But for a lot of them, you know, they knew like we have to make these hard decisions. One of our founders said something that I found really profound. It was, we started our founder calls pretty early into COVID, these weekly calls we do for anyone who wants to pop on. And he said something like, you know, we didn't like cause this to happen, but we're the ones in charge while this is happening. So we have to step up to the plate. And I was like, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so our founders have had to make a lot of choices that are really hard. For a lot of our founders, this is the first sort of financial crisis they've been through. This certainly, I mean, for many of us, it's the first pandemic we've ever been through, but a lot of our founders, they were kids in 2008.
Yeah.
And so they didn't get to experience this. So this is the first time going through something very financially shaky. On the way other end of things, some of our companies are just kicking ass in the COVID climate. One of our companies is Loom. They're an asynchronous video tool. They were primarily used for designers and remote teams, and they consider themselves a public service now. And so I know teachers at Berkeley are using it. I point because Berkeley is like 2 miles away from me this way.
Okay.
But I'm like, you're probably like, why is she going like that? It's like, no, Berkeley's that away. But yeah, teachers are using it to teach 2,000 person, lectures and courses. Families are using it to keep in touch. Designers and coders are using it for feedback, and they saw a huge increase in their usage when COVID happened. One of our companies is called Hamama. They are in the direct-to-consumer space, which we have actually done very little investing in. So one of the interesting things about being an investor is you get to learn alongside your founders a ton. And so we knew the founders for quite a while. I actually became a user of the product. It's this microgreens sort of hydroponic product where you put these seed quilts just in 3 inches of water, and in 10 days you have these sprouts, and you eat them, and then you recycle the sprout quilt, and then you put a new one and you're done. No dirt. Like, I love it. It's very, very simple. It makes any frozen meal feel healthy, because you're like, oh, I'm eating Trader Joe's burrito, but I'm gonna cut some Hamama sprouts, and this makes it healthy. Which, yeah, I eat a lot of frozen foods. But
I mean, Trader Joe's really does have a great variety of frozen.
I do love TJ's. People know I'm kind of a TJ's fanatic, but I have to be honest. As of this week, I've decided not to shop at Trader Joe's for a while, because I'm like TJ'd out.
I got tired of it.
I got tired of it. I was like, I need to start cooking real food again. I love to cook. So I was like, okay, I need to get away from the packaged goods. But Hamama did and is doing just amazingly well. I think they have a staff of 25 people now. They grew from 12 people over the course of just a couple of months. They're moving into a new warehouse facility that's going to double their size. And it's just amazing to see that, like, they're getting this product out to people. The idea of the Victory Garden started coming back when COVID hit, and people were thinking about growing their own food a lot. So it's been really interesting to see just the wide array of how our companies are handling COVID, how we're handling COVID. And we gave up our office, actually. That was something that's been kind of wild. Like, we packed it up maybe 3 weeks ago. And I just said, I don't think we're gonna need it for the rest of this year.
Right.
Kind of crazy. I think I'm still adjusting to this idea of, like, that my life is going to be this for a long time.
Yeah, I know. It's weird, right? It almost makes you think, like, do we just need to, like, cohabitate? Like, do you need to just live with the people you work with?
So
just buy a big house?
We just did a retreat for 15, 17, just for our team. I think it wouldn't be responsible right now to, like, have our founders come out for something like that. We would love to do it. We love doing founder retreats, but the 4 of us got together. We all drove out from different parts of the US to Montana. It's like a 20-hour drive. Like, none of us killed each other. It was good. We did accidentally spray ourselves with bear spray, which was hilarious. But yeah, we got together, and it was great to, like, work together in person. In fact, it's only been a couple days since we've been back from that trip, but I noticed feeling a little bit down, like, I was just with people for a week. And now my roommate's gone this week, and I'm like, oh, now I'm just alone in my house.
Oh, that's funny.
So, yeah, how have things with COVID been for you?
Oh, it's totally different, right? Like, we put on conferences and events, and the majority have been, not majority, all of them have been in person. But what's been great, it's really opened up this ability to talk with other people, people like yourself. And I find that I reach out to folks that I might not have otherwise, because I felt like, not for any other reason than it's like, well, if we can't meet in person, like, why am I going to reach out to you? Right. And so that's been pretty neat, talking to people all over the world that, like, hey, like, come on the podcast, let's have a chat. And it's been good in that regard. I've also actually enjoyed personally working from home, because I have a 7-year-old, and being around him and my wife has been nice. And so I haven't really minded it, to be honest.
How's your son doing with learning at home?
So, my wife is just one of those super people that she's actually, I'd love for you to talk to her sometime, to be honest, if you
Yeah,
out just outside, because she's all about, education,
yeah,
and, she's not a teacher, but she's very involved in his school. And then, he does his, before COVID, he'd do his schooling, and she'd always have him do like either other stuff, but like fun
yeah.
stuff, not like,
Mental.
do this work and I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So, he loves learning. He loves learning. And we've actually been talking about that because, she was, when everything first started happening, she pulled him out of school like in beginning of February. She's like,
Oh
this is
wow.
weird. Like, this is, she's like, this feels really weird and like different
Yeah.
than other times.
Yeah.
And so she's been like homeschooling him essentially since
Oh,
then.
that's great.
But yeah, no, it's been good. I mean, I haven't done anything, and so it's been all her.
But the beauty, I think, sometimes of just having children around is that they learn through osmosis. It's like
totally.
you're having conversation that you're like, I didn't even know you were listening.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
with
Well,
15, 17, we've joked sometimes, like, and we couldn't do this right now, but like in the future, we've wanted to be like part homeschool center where people could just like bring their kids and their kids
yeah.
could listen to pitches and like, it's like
Oh,
what an
totally.
education that would be. That'd be so cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been fun. I mean, part of it, like my son will, every once in a while, I'll be on a call or an interview like this, and he'll just open the door and he just kind of peeks out to the side. He's like, I just want to watch, and he's
That's
like, it's okay,
awesome.
Dad. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, well, I think those early experiences are sometimes more paramount for us than we can imagine. I mean,
I totally agree.
there
I
might be
totally
things
agree.
that you would look back in your childhood and be like, oh yeah, this podcast thing kind of makes sense based on who I
Right.
used to be.
Well, it's funny because I was saying to someone, I was like, sometimes when I see him wear a mask, I kind of feel sad for him. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, but that's all he knows, right? So for him, it's just part of the adventure. And when he's older, it's just going to be part of his experience that then
Right.
shapes him to what he becomes and so forth. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
no,
that's
it's
cool.
super interesting. I wanted to ask you real quick
Yeah,
before we kind of start wrapping up here
yeah.
is, what have you noticed from an inbound interest since COVID? Like, are more people reaching out to you, less, the same?
It's been insane. I mean, part of it is that we launched our Invisible College program, and so we're getting a lot of inbound from that. And we are extremely accessible as a fund. Accessibility is actually one of our core values, and so I would say like 85 to 90% of the people write in, we do a phone call with. And it's like a good hearty 30-minute phone call to find out more, just because we know talent comes from all over. But yeah, when COVID hit, our contact forms went through the roof. We've had to start taking some calls at like 7 in the morning because like
Oh yeah,
we just can't even handle the bandwidth. I'm like,
yeah.
oh God, I'm like, how are we gonna keep doing this? Oh yeah, sadly our contact form broke a couple of weeks ago, and I think all of us are so tired from taking so many calls that like none of us like noticed.
Right. That's funny.
So we're like, oh shit, all right, we haven't gotten a contact form in like 2 weeks. What's going on? And we just looked and we have a backlog of like 150 contact
Wow.
forms. I'm like, uh-oh, we're screwed.
Yeah, seriously.
So I mean, it's a good problem for us to have. What's interesting to me is that I just feel like we're in a really like primed and blessed position because we work with students. We've done online stuff for a long time. We've done remote office hours for a long time. Where for other venture funds, I'm like, how are they sourcing? I mean, I keep getting these invites to one of those lunch, I don't even know what, lunch club. And I'm like, I don't want
Oh
to be
yeah,
at
yeah.
a lunch club. Like, I want to
Right.
be talking to founders. But like, that's how people are trying to source connections and meet people. And it's going to be harder for folks. But I think because of our call to action and working with students and our name and then what we were talking about earlier and our brand is out there, we're able to really fulfill on a need that's out there right now. And so it's a good problem to have that we're like, gosh, I don't even know. I don't know how we're going to get through that,
Totally.
that backlog that we were like, no, there's nothing wrong with the contact form. It's like, oh wait, but we meet great people that way. So yeah, it's been through the roof. Our LPs have asked us like, yeah, like what, we did a call with our, and LPs are limited partners in a fund. They're the people who fund you to do what you're doing. And we did a Zoom chat with them a couple of weeks ago as an update, and they were asking the same question of like, oh, how's your deal flow, and and I'm like, we can't even handle it. Like it's, which is both a good and a bad problem to
Right.
have at the same time.
And so you're probably living on Zoom. What kind of tips do you have for founders who are pitching investors over
Sure.
Zoom, right? It's a different dynamic.
Yeah, it is a different dynamic, but I think I guess it depends. So I would say for founders who have a little bit more of like it's, or still early stage, but more of a company built up, like, maybe they still have an office, maybe if it's a hardware product, they have a warehouse space they're using, something like that. I like to say that there's the opportunity for founders to have second meeting optics in a first meeting because of frame control, like literal frame control of that. One of our founders at Hamama, for example, when they were fundraising, Camille, the founder, would pick up her phone and be like, "Oh, cool. Hey, I'm so glad we're talking. Great. Okay, I'm going to take you around the warehouse right now." And then what, and
Yeah.
because it's really hard to get investors to leave their offices. Like, we leave our offices a lot because we love to meet with people and we love to see where people are. Of course, that was pre-COVID stuff, and we haven't met people in person for a while. But it's neat to be able to see someone's space. And so I think for a lot of founders, use that to your advantage and be able to, like, if you're actually still working out of a space, use it to showcase it. I think
Right.
that can be really helpful. I think for people who are really early, go through a demo with people. Frame control is real in terms of just controlling the meeting itself and being like, "Hey, cool, so glad we're on this call. Like, yeah, let me answer questions, but let me walk you through a demo of what we're doing, or let me walk you through a deck," and so on. So I think there's a little bit of like a word power is coming to mind, of like, not like a power grab per se, but like, you just have, I think founders have the opportunity to control the optics of what they're doing more than when you would typically go to an investor's office and have to be in their environment.
Yeah.
Um, Another tip is that you have to talk about the COVID environment. I can't tell you how many founders, even my own founders, who, like, they'll send me the new deck they have for fundraising right now, and it's the same deck they were fundraising with in February. And I'm like, what? Like,
Yeah.
one of our companies just finished a fundraising round. They're called MadeBot, and they make a robot that cleans floors. And pre-COVID, it was useful for people. Post-COVID, it's like, this is really important. Like,
Yeah.
if you're working on something important in COVID, your thing is probably even more important. But the founder didn't have anything in the deck about, like, "Hey, here's why we can do sterilization. We can do this. We can do," like, he was like, "Oh, but isn't that obvious?" I'm like, it is, but you need to lead the horse to water. Like, you
Yeah.
have to do it. So people should have a slide about COVID in their deck. They should really be like solidifying on their mission for what they're doing now in a COVID environment. So those would be a couple pieces of advice, is that, for a lot of people, if you're working on something important, COVID has made your problem even more important, and you cannot stress that enough in your materials.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
What are the kind of companies, or you call it industries, verticals, or problems that you think are quote unquote COVID proof, but from a startup perspective, right? Like, we think of Amazon and like the fact they have, but they have all this infrastructure, but like from
Yeah.
a startup perspective,
Yeah.
maybe not COVID proof, but become interesting in a COVID environment.
So we're seeing, I mean, I can tell you what I'm sort of seeing. Like, people are definitely interested in online learning right now in a way. There's kind of this trope of the VC space of, like, VCs love to solve their own problems. And now that VCs are like, "Oh God, I don't know how to educate my kid," they actually care about teachers, which I find refreshing.
Yeah,
Um,
I've seen quite a few like VCs talk about micro schools and things
yes,
like that.
yes, all the rage. And it's
Yeah.
like, these have been going on for like 10 years, like, but whatever. Um, but yeah, people are getting more interested in education. Remote work is huge. People I think, are thinking a lot more about employee benefits and how do you take care of your team in a remote environment. I'm trying to think. Oh God, I'm not entirely sure why, but we are seeing a ton in the construction industry.
Hmm.
I think now there's a couple of theories on this. I put this on Twitter. I was like, "Yo, Twitter, why am I seeing everyone and their brother doing a construction tech company right now? Like, what is going
Yeah.
on?" Some people say it's because Mark Andreessen put out his "It's Time to Build" manifesto, and people, like, took it super literally. Like, I don't know. Some people are saying that, like, it's one of the industries that's still out there and moving, that people can kind of see.
Yeah.
It's an industry. There's a lot of industries that maybe were on paper before that need to be more digital now. So that is certainly popular to see. But but yeah, there's a bunch of different changes. Those are the ones that kind of come to mind off the top of my head. But the way that we like to think about things is not that we're going to put out to founders like, hey, here's what we think is hot and we hope you're working on this. We really expect to meet people who are going to bring us to the frontier of some sort of knowledge that we've never even thought about.
Yeah.
Like, I love when I talked, I won't say what the idea is, but I talked to a young person earlier today who has a really interesting idea in the mental health space. So that's another space that we're seeing taking off a lot. People are talking about like, how do we support each other in a global pandemic?
Totally.
And on the surface of it, actually, the person wrote into our contact form, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, mental health. Like, I thought I kind of knew what they were talking about. But then the one reason we always do these phone calls with people is that people are way more dynamic than they could ever be on a piece of paper or pitch
Sure.
deck. And so I'm talking to this person, and they're talking about what they want to do in it. And I was like, oh, like, this is really interesting. Like, I want to dig in more here. But it's like, I didn't have that idea and say to somebody, oh, yeah, mental health is going to be huge or education is going to be huge. It's more that we want to see people who are really passionate about something coming to us, kind of infecting us with that meme of like, this is the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, mental health right now during COVID-19 seems like a big thing. I
Oh,
remember
huge.
when
Yeah.
I talking to friends and they'd be like, yeah, I don't know why I just feel kind of down and been in the house. I'm like, hey,
Hello.
it's not a snow day, right?
Right.
Like if it was a snow
Right.
day, you could just go play outside and the snow is going
Right.
to melt in a couple days. Like
Yeah.
this is different. So
Yeah, no, it's and I think people are and myself included are learning how to sort of give ourselves a break. I know just for myself, I'll have like one productive week and one week that's just like I don't want to do
mhm,
anything.
yeah,
And I think we're all kind of adjusting to that. This is going to be, I think, a longer haul than we imagine, and so that we have to, yeah, we have to get out of the mindset of that. Like we should be able to carry on just as normal because this is not a normal time.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, Danielle, I've loved this conversation. One
Yeah.
question I love to ask as my
Yeah.
final
Sure.
question is, what is a question that you have that you'd like to ask our audience that they can think about as they go about their day, as they're listening to this conversation we had?
Gosh, what is a question that I want to ask your audience? I would say, one thing that I've noticed, especially during COVID times, is that it's also been a time for people to get back into hobbies and different things or learn a new thing. So I would say to your audience, like, what is something that, like, I think we all have those hobbies from the past or maybe from our childhood that we're like, oh, I haven't done this music thing in so long, or I haven't done
Yeah.
this thing in so long. Like, what's that thing that you've been really wanting to take back up, and how could you work it into your week starting this week? Like, what would that look like? I've taken up all kinds of hobbies myself between music and art and all kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, I'd be really curious, like, what are the things that your audience wants to take back up that would maybe reinvigorate them during this time that has
Yeah.
been pretty wishy-washy for people?
No, I love it. And when you're doing those hobbies too, it really allows you to become creative, right? Or you start
Oh,
thinking
yeah.
about other things or
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Danielle, what are some good ways that people can either stay in touch with you,
Yeah.
follow you, pay
Yeah.
attention to what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter, D Strachman. You can email me, Danielle at 1517fun.com. Obviously, find me on LinkedIn. You can contact us through our contact form. If someone does send me an email and says like, hey, I want to talk, like I get a lot of those. So you got to tell me what you want to talk about. Like, give me some meat to chew on.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, reach out and we'll be in touch.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining me. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Super fun conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the TF podcast. Please make sure that you are subscribed and do us a favor and fill in those stars. Goes a long way to make sure that other people get to hear this great podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at @JGProduct, and you can learn more about what we're doing with TF Labs at tflabs.io. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all soon.